The Hunger Games, Songbirds and Snakes is now the fifth film in the 11-year Hunger Games franchise. This one is a prequel set 64 years before our Katniss gets into the games in the film in 2012. This one stars Tom Blythe as Cornelius Snow, who would later be played by Donald Sutherland in the four main Hunger Games films. He was the president of Pan Am, but in this film, he's an up-and-coming person who's trying to become the president of Pan Am. But as he's about to become someone who's about to rise in the ranks at the Capitol, the creator of the game, played by Peter Dinklage, says that they have to mentor the up-and-coming talent in the Hunger Games, and no matter if they win or lose, to try to prove something to the Capitol. The game maker is played by Viola Davis. The person that Snow is the mentor of is Lucy Gray, the District 12 representative, who's played by Rachel Zegler. Also in the film is Jason Schwartzman, who plays kind of the Stanley Tucci role as kind of the announcer and host of the Hunger Games. And you also have Hunter Schafer in a major role playing Tigress, Snow's cousin and kind of lone main family member. The film is 2 hours and 37 minutes long and is PG-13. Welcome back to a brand new review here on Mac Talks Movies. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, ring the bell. I talk movies, TV shows, I talk box office, and also do movie franchise rankings, which will include a ranking of all 5 Hunger Games movies coming out this weekend, so stay tuned for that. Comment down below. What are your thoughts on this film? If you've seen it, did you like it? Did you not like it? Should they continue on with this franchise? Should they just stop now after this film? If you've not seen it, tell me, have you seen the Hunger Games films, or is this going to be your first time ever watching a Hunger Games film? Let me know in the comment section down below. And also, please like the video, the thumbs up button down below. That's how you support this channel. So, as I said, this is the 5th film now in the Hunger Games franchise, and I grew up, my generation for sure, grew up with this franchise. The original books came out, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, in the 2008 to 2010 range. All those books were coming out. And while my family, my brother, my mom read it, I did not. My only way into this franchise has been the movies. And again, I was 10 years old when the first Hunger Games came out. And they were clearly, again, very, very similar to, not in the quality, but very similar with Twilight in the way of the YA adaptations that really broke through in the mid 2000s and 2010s. And again, it really got obviously Jennifer Lawrence off the ground and a lot of different people off the ground with those films from 2012. And this is the first Hunger Games film, obviously since Mockingjay Part 2, but that was 8 years ago. So they made those 4 films consecutive years. It's been a long time, but I was interested because Snow in those main films is a very fascinating character. President of Pan Am, he's one of the MVPs of those 4 original Hunger Games films. And it's interesting that they are doing a prequel based on him. So let's get into my thoughts, my non-spoiler thoughts with this movie. And overall, I am genuinely surprised about how much I really did enjoy this movie. I did not have super high expectations for this movie. Also, let you know before I get into also my thoughts, I did watch this past week, all 4 Hunger Games, both to do my ranking and leading into this movie. So I'm back in this kind of world. So I also have that perspective of the newness of this franchise in my mind at the moment. So I was genuinely surprised. One of the most surprised feelings I've had in a movie theater all year long. Not that this is one of the best movies of the year type thing, but I just was not expecting too much from this movie, but I generally really liked it. For you guys also to know, the movie is broken up in parts. There's part 1, it throws up on the screen. So that's also how I kind of break down this movie as well. But the first 2 acts or the first 2 parts of this movie were really awesome. And I was really locked in from the opening credits to the ending of part 2 of this movie. It is really interesting. You kind of get the time of the Hunger Games we are going into in this movie, the 10th Hunger Games. And this is a game, and the whole plot really of this movie, which I really enjoyed learning about, is the fact that the Hunger Games at this point are not being watched by anyone. They're just not reaching a big audience. Obviously, we know the main Hunger Games films, it is the end-all, be-all of society is everyone watching the Hunger Games. But we kind of see what Snow brought to the Hunger Games. We obviously meet Peter Dinklage, who plays the creator of the Hunger Games, and Viola Davis as the original game maker of the Hunger Games. But Snow as a having mentors. We've never seen mentors of volunteer of people of the Hunger Games ever, even in the four films. So it's definitely a different dynamic, and I really enjoyed that. And if you are a massive fan of the Hunger Games, I assume you are if you're watching this movie. Um, there are some really good hints at what Snow ultimately brought to the table, both as someone who is the president of Pan Am, but also someone who is the helm of the Hunger Games themselves. And there are some really interesting things that obviously make sense 64 years down the line with the original films, but this one has fresh ideas that obviously we know what they are in the four original Hunger Games movies. And I found that to be super fascinating. And Snow's perspective on trying to get people to watch the games. And one of the reasons why Rachel Zegler is doubtfully cast in this movie is that she is a very good singer. And this movie is not a musical anyway, but there are a lot of songs in the movie, and Zegler does sing a lot throughout the entire film. And that is what Snow sees in Lucy Gray, that no one else has brought to the table in these Hunger Games, is someone to root for. And there's this kind of this innocence to her and the gravitational pull to her because she is a really good singer, singing very powerful, moving songs. And that could be something that gets people to bet on people, to send them food and water during the Hunger Games. And that's obviously what we learn about. But it was a really interesting idea that the movie definitely goes with in the first two acts of the movie. Jason Schwartzman is definitely my MVP of the supporting cast. As I said, he's basically playing kind of the Stanley Tucci role of those four films where he is the host, but he also has other he's also a weatherman, and he is hilarious, especially in part two of this movie. He is scene stealing in this movie. Tom Blythe is also excellent as Snow. You feel empathy for the character, but you also realize the inner darkness that is fighting within him throughout the entire movie that, will obviously be exposed throughout the end of the movie, and obviously what he becomes as when Donald Sutherland performs as him in the four Hunger Games movies. I really enjoy Rachel Zegler in this movie. Now, she does have a different accent, and it is jarring the first time you kind of hear it in the movie, but you do kind of get used to it throughout the entire film. But the film does kind of hang on the balance of the chemistry between Blythe and Zegler. I think the chemistry is there. But as I said, also to let you guys know, Zegler obviously is the more famous one by far of the two actors, but this is definitely Blythe's movie. Zegler is not the lead character of the film. It is really Snow's movie. It's kind of a character study on, as we know him as in the four films, as President Snow. And that's also really interesting. And Blythe and Zegler both do a good job in their respective roles. Peter Dinklage is also very good, as well as Viola Davis. While I think Viola Davis is like the character look is a bit too over the top for me. She always brings it. There's no bad Viola Davis performances, and she's excellent as always. But also Hunter Schafer gets a lot more to do in the first half of the movie. And when she's in the movie, she's excellent. She's the only good person really in Snow's life before Lucy enters the fray. And their dynamic is really interesting, especially as I'm not going to reveal who Hunter Schafer plays in the movie. I will, because it's in everything, but she plays Tigress. And if you know the character of Tigress, who shows up later in Mockingjay Part 2, it's a very dark relationship maybe under the surface, and I really like that dynamic as well. Now, obviously, the games are not as interesting because they take place very early days of the Hunger Games. They're not these video game level action type scenes like you were in the first four films, but I still enjoyed the games itself. There are a couple just jarring deaths, as there always are, and that kind of took me off guard as usual. But I think the surrounding elements of the Hunger Games, obviously also the Hunger Games being halfway through the movie instead of the ending of the movie, was definitely an interesting choice. But I still think the biggest problem with this movie is the third act. Part 3, for me, is just a mess and a bit too boring. It felt like Lionsgate heard a lot of critiques, fair critiques, that they should have never split the Mockingjay book into two movies. But I felt like once you get done with the Hunger Games, you feel like there's some resolution and there's some hanging threads that could be explored in another movie. But instead, there's another 50 minutes of the movie left for the third act. And it's boring, it's too long, and it's by far the most uninteresting aspect of the movie. And I know there were some necessary elements of that third act that needs to be in this movie, but you could really feel the runtime once we get to part 3. I think the first 2 parts fly by. You're locked in, you're focused, you're not even thinking about the clock. But I think once part 3 happens and the direction that they go into, it's too boring, it's too slow. And it didn't bring me back in like the first 2 acts did. I also think another problem with the actual Hunger Games themselves in this movie is that really, other than Lucy and maybe 1 or 2 of the other competitors, you just don't know who any of these people are. And I'm not saying you need a backstory, but there are so many deaths that happen in obviously this version of the Hunger Games, and you just don't care about the other people that are getting killed in the movie. Other than, them being some really innocent people in the games, you just don't care about really anyone outside of Lucy in the actual games themselves. And I do think that pulls out a lot of the emotion of the games when you don't only care about one of the characters being involved in the games. That's why I think the first 2 Hunger Games films did a really good job of really caring about a couple of the competitors in the game. This one, you're kind of just caring about one, and it does detach you from the other characters themselves. And I do think there was also a couple just on the nose Easter eggs throughout the film, especially towards the 3rd act. And part 3 is a couple just on the nose, wink, wink references. And it just felt so forced to me. But overall, I enjoyed myself watching Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. It's not a great movie. I think it's way too long, a lot longer than it absolutely should have been. I think they could have either done another movie or cut this 3rd act to be at least like 25 or 30 minutes instead of like 50 minutes as is. I do think we should have cared a little bit more about the actual games themselves, and hopefully the 3rd act could have been a lot more interesting. But the first 2 acts are awesome. They keep you locked in. The politics, Snow is a fascinating character that you want to learn more about as the movie goes on. And I just really enjoyed myself watching this film. So overall, I'm going to give The Hunger Games, This Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a 3.5 out of 5. I am going to go 74% for this movie. I quite enjoyed myself watching it, and I was really surprised by how much I was excited and enthralled to be back in the world of The Hunger Games. So what are your thoughts of this film? Comment section down below. Like the video, subscribe. Coming out probably tomorrow will be my full ranking of all 5 Hunger Games movies, including this one. So stay tuned for that video, and I'll see you guys soon.